important wars that have happened recently that are of particular importance to citizens of the United States. And we move then through the semester through a scientific section talking about the technology of war, and then into what we intend to be, in a way, an inspirational sort of tie-up at the end, giving people, especially students, concrete suggestions for how they can become active in preventing. This course is applicable as elective credit to major and minor programs in the following departments, or the following BA programs: political science, liberal studies, Hutchins School, English, theater arts, philosophy, communication studies, the new global studies major, environmental studies and planning, sociology, psychology, anthropology, and a few others that I don't have in my memory at the moment. So I strongly encourage you, if you have been inspired or at least had your curiosity awakened by this series, to consider strongly enrolling in the War and Peace lecture series for the fall. The number of it is University 301.
And so we need to really find out why that has been the case. Because of the subject matter, because of the theme, which all of us, of course, consider working on that lecture series, consider to be exceedingly vital, particularly for people of the younger generation, because we already, some of us are, at least I'm speaking for myself, one foot in the grave, so to speak. So if there are not going to be young people who will have learned and really reflected on what we have said throughout the semester, various speakers and some of us, nothing will change. And so I'm particularly pointing out the fact that if we don't take it seriously, if we don't recognize the unusual chance we have here to participate in a lecture series of this nature with Mr. Oak, and Oak may have tremendously serious consequences if we miss that. So it's just kind of a personal introduction. The second point, which I think is very important, how we relate experience to people who only can respond intellectually and perhaps to some extent emotionally or psycho-emotionally to the consequences and the suffering of the Holocaust. And I thought about it a great deal, how can we relate that in some way which would also motivate you, not just in a brain, but also psycho-emotionally, so that somehow the emotion and the intellect will be combined, and therefore the force, your motivation will be enhanced by combining these two, namely the understanding on one hand and the suffering which people had to endure, who died and who survived, because with survival, suffering has no ending, as you some of you might recognize. So that to me is extremely important, that the message will be carried by those people who have understood what we are trying to do here, and will continue to enlarge their knowledge on what brings about a cataclysmic catastrophe of such nature as Holocaust, genocide, and so forth. It's happening today. What are we doing in order to help it in a way which will prevent such events in the future? And they are not going to stop if we don't do something about it, if we don't become active. So in other words, we only can become activists if we understand what is to see an escalation of violence and conflict starting with prejudice and stereotyping, prejudging something. We need to prevent it in order to be informed as much as we possibly can, and certainly the sources do exist today more than ever before. And the second thing, which is very important, that we think critically and become independent thinkers. And you can only become independent thinkers if you have the resources, if you have the mind to store these resources and apply them. So these are perhaps the most important things which I would like to say, which are on my mind. And the reason why we have started the lecture series is precisely to alert people to the dangers which existed and still exist, not only existed in the past, but still exist today. And what we as individuals can do when we develop the power of knowledge and we develop some compassion and concern for what happens to others, not just to ourselves, but in a way it's also a very selfish thing, because if something happens to others, sooner or later it will also happen to us. So therefore we are acting also to a large extent in self-interest, in our self-interest, to become preventers, as I would like to call it, preventers. And for that we also have to develop my favorite sort of phrase, or if you will, idiomatic identification, moral intelligence. Without diligence, the chances are nothing is going to change.
Okay. Thank you, John. Well, we have a volunteer student kicking it off from the student perspective. Well, I'd love to hear a female voice. Aurelia?
Okay.
Dawn?
The reason why I took this lecture series, and I continue to do so, is because it's hard to understand how it is that people can treat other people the way that they did. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about it, and what I constantly ask myself, is that would I have been any different? And to me, that's kind of the whole purpose of me taking this class, is that what is it that the liberators and the rescuers possess within themselves that I don't have, because I don't know if I would have had the courage to stand out and be different. And so these are the things I look for in the lecture series. And I've learned from like the lecture with Richard Paul that I think it's just human nature to have prejudice in you, whether it's towards a certain group or religion or whatever it is. I just think it's just a part of us, but it's how we deal with that part of us which makes us stand out from the others. I was kind of looking for ways, and I know it's not easy, maybe not even possible, to once I've identified a prejudice within me, what then? You know, so now I know that I have this. Well, what am I supposed to do with it? How am I supposed to be different? It's not enough just to stand back and say, okay, I have these feelings. And that's something that I really didn't find too much in here, other than just keep reading more, keep listening more, keep asking questions. I catch myself now as I watch people, a certain label will come to mind, and I'll think, well, Dawn, that's not very, but that's still, to me, just isn't enough. And like I said, I just was kind of looking for ways to work with that. And it was pointed out to me by some of the professors is that these are philosophers that speak to us. These aren't guys that are going to tell us, or women who are going to tell us what necessary actions to take, other than to get better education.
Make a quote like this, but we are looking for an analogous Holocaust to emerge somewhere when we've got so many smaller Holocausts there, ones without, what should we say, crematoria, without ghettos, without Nuremberg laws, things that even we as students of the Holocaust are in a sense looking for in some kind of an analogy with what Adolf Hitler perpetrated. And it seems to me that certainly we have some analogies out there besides just the killing fields or the killing towns or what have you, killing fronts, either relocation of peoples, either voluntarily or involuntarily, and Kristallnachts of a sort of bashing of shops and property and so forth. But it seems that in terms of what I personally have learned or tried to learn, is that some cases we're moving away nowadays from totalitarian systems committing Holocaust on innocents to anarchistic situations. Not always, of course. There are governments, whether they're committing some kind of genocide in Tibet or in Sudan, that we can identify as such. But if you look at Liberia, for instance, or even Bosnia, we've got multiple parties and multiple factors that are waging some kind of genocidal activities out there. And it seems to me that somehow we've reached a kind of realization, at least I may have, whereby on one hand a totalitarian system and on the other hand a kind of sheer anarchy are the most to carry out some kind of Holocaust-like activities. And what we need in terms of the prevention of Holocaust are more of what's in the middle, such as a respect for civil rights, the kinds of things we've just been hearing already, a willingness to compromise, a respect for the rule of law, the rule of whatever the Constitution is, some kind of pluralistic interaction and accommodation of others' different viewpoints, political, ideological, ethnic, racial, religious, whatever. Even Nazi Germany was preceded by this kind of a situation in the Weimar Republic, so it's not as if just putting it into place by imposition or forcibly is some kind of a preventative measure. But more and more we see this problem of to what degree can outside forces intervene, whether it's writing Congress or it's some kind of military intervention, effective or not so effective. The Somalia experience makes us wonder, even the Rwanda experience makes us wonder how effective some of these outside interventions can be. And as I think somebody put it, how much worse it might have been if there had been no intervention whatsoever. One last brief point, and that's what about post-genocidal settlements? As Professor Steiner mentioned, the survivors go on. To what degree are they able to integrate into any society, their own or some other society where they've migrated to, they've either been forced to go or merely go one way or another? And the question of displaced persons, of treaties and accords, of troops involved that somehow put together, patched together some kind of settlement. To what degree can the hatred recur again? And this is obviously a very important question if we're looking at Liberia or Bosnia or Rwanda. To what degree can there be a settlement, especially when we don't have complete unconditional surrender of the guilty parties, such as we saw in 1945 in Nazi Germany? So this anarchy is certainly something that's of concern to me when many of the parties are not brought to justice, partly because of this semi-equilibrium between perpetrators in some of these civil dispute like Holocausts. So punishment of the perpetrators, to what degree bringing them to justice or bringing just justice in general to the society, letting people come back to their homes if that's at all possible. Another issue that I certainly haven't seen resolved more recently, most victims don't have an Israel or some other place out there that they can call their ethnic home, but on the other hand, there may be willing countries such as Germany has been in recent years for Yugoslavs fleeing or other places, and to what degree can these integrate peacefully into society? We've got some questions about that, even with respect to Germany these days. These are just some of the issues and questions that have raised themselves in my mind in terms of what we've learned and what we've still got left to learn about the nature of Holocaust, preventing it, and resolving it.
Thank you, Steve. Next student. John, you want to go? Maria, or you? Okay.
Coming into this course, I had many misconceptions about the Holocaust. I thought the study of the Holocaust would be just an interesting history. I realized that it would become a perpetually relevant lesson in values that would inform my gut reaction on a dozen issues I was read in newspapers. Issues like immigration, police brutality, capital punishment, and racism. And yet, solely perpetrated by the Nazis, who were given to sociopathic behavior anyway. I thought the majority of Germany's military and population and the inhabitants of its conquests were at best unaware of the genocide or at least innocent bystanders. Of course, back then, I believed that there was such a thing as an innocent bystander. Getting into this course, though, I learned just how widespread the collaboration was, both within and outside Germany, and how participation in the genocide was fed both by widely held anti-Semitism and by a system of coercion that made perpetrators out of ordinary men. But just at the point I was ready to believe that all Germans and most Europeans had victims' blood on their hands, I learned the more complex reality that, along with the pervasiveness of anti-Semitism in Europe, there were also shining examples of sympathy, support, and intervention on behalf of Europe's Jews. I learned from Mary Feldsteiner and Paul Schwarzbart that behind the incomparable numbers, every victim and every survivor has a face, a name, a story of their own, and a memory which the perpetrators had tried to erase, to make them into something less than human. I've learned that's what racism really is, the dehumanization of another person, and that it's not just harmless talk, it's the first step towards genocide. We need to use our language carefully. I've used a slur that I thought was pretty benign, white trash. This course has made me stop and realize that my thoughtless use of words was really saying that human beings should be thrown away. Well, I don't use that term anymore. Letting words that we've carelessly picked up do our thinking for us is one way we begin to see others as less than human. Hand in hand with the dehumanization of others goes the dehumanization of those who indulge in such casual hatreds. Both are precursors to violence. I've learned how all too easily our humanity can be drained from us if we slacken our vigilance, and that there are situations like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising where retaining one's humanity costs the ultimate pathings to die fighting. The most important lesson to me was this, because, as Dr. Zimbardo proved, it would be so easy to transform me into a perpetrator. Continuous education is imperative, learning both the paths that corruption follows and the values that disrupt its progress. That way I can recognize its roots, nip it in the bud, and cultivate the path of resistance instead. You may think that it could never happen here and that a life such as mine will never be challenged by such troubles, and I hope. But I think that these lectures have taught us that genocide can happen anywhere and that moral ambivalence aids its progress. As I learned from Alan Suzanne Batzdorf, who escaped Germany in 1938, before Kristallnacht, many Germans were confident that their countrymen would never allow Hitler to continue the oppression. But in fact, even among Germans who disapproved of the oppression, many knuckled under to the social and economic pressures to disassociate themselves from Jews or suffer the loss of their own security. I believe it could happen. Taking responsibility not only on behalf of others, but also for one's own conduct, prevents being manipulated by those who would make a perpetrator out of you. Ultimately, if I don't take responsibility for my actions, a war crimes court will not hesitate in holding me accountable for them. That which Dr. Jan Karski called the soul, and Dr. John Steiner has termed moral intelligence, gets cultivated through the act of taking responsibility. As I see it, what the soul essentially prompts us to do, if we listen closely enough, is to resist what is wrong. This can take the form of organized protests, civil disobedience, giving asylum to refugees, or speaking up when others are being denigrated. Resistance is not polite, and it may upset those who thought they knew you. Having the courage of one's convictions will at the very least make you late for dinner, and at the worst get you killed. But as the status quo around you devolves into increasing injustice, if you continue to look the other way, it will eat away at your soul until you haven't enough integrity left to answer the most basic questions of life. The perpetrators of the Holocaust placed its bystanders on a steep ethical slope and applied every conceivable pressure to cause them to fall. It's easy enough to be tolerant of people who are different until speaking out on their behalf is no longer popular and perhaps even dangerous. The first time you remain silent might feel uncomfortable, but a few more ethical compromises on down the slope and it gets easier. But by then it becomes almost impossible to regain the moral high ground, especially when your country has become a police state. The pressure then becomes overwhelming to mind your own business. It all starts with talk and with so-called idle bigotry. But as complicity breeds further complicity, by the time you're expected to attend a book burning, it's too late to stop it. And people you know have already disappeared. I can't certainly because ordinary men and women can also make the difference in preventing genocide. But in our society, so preoccupied with distractions, critical thought about current events has become just more trouble than it's worth for far too many of us. I think it's just such a decay of vigilance that makes fertile soil for the next genocide. To prevent it, perhaps we might follow the ethical doctrine of Immanuel Kant, which guided the White Rose, which was Germany's student resistance movement. He said that one must act as though legislating for the world, and I think that's good advice.
I want to keep a copy of that. Marvelous essay. Thank you very much. Next faculty voice. Who shall it be? Okay, Myrna.
John's presentation was just the last problem. One of the things that I feel very strongly is that preventing genocide begins very much the way Dr. Steiner described it. And, I'd like to repeat what he said. He said that we need to function on two levels. And the first level is the thinking level, where we need information and critical thinking. We need to get as much information as possible and think critically about the situation. But then he also talks about compassion and concern, that we have to develop, in some sense, all of those components to moral intelligence. Dawn said that we also have to have the courage to stand out and be different. And that brings me to something that I find very uncomfortable about the society that we live in. And of course, about the ideas that we come up with about how to prevent genocide. We keep talking about ourselves. We have to develop ourselves as individuals. We have to develop our own moral intelligence. Put that while that is very important in the first step, we also need to resist something in American society, and that is the religion of the individual. We talk in this country about individual this, individual that, individual this. But if you think of perhaps 2 or 3 of the lecturers who spoke to you, and you remember how much better you felt after Paul Schwartzbach, that's about all the people who work together to make sure that we survive. The people who work together to give care and concern to him, as well as listening to our Danish rescuer, Deepen. I don't know whether you heard it in his words or not, but he did not do what he did alone. He knew that he could do what he did because there were other people who would support him, who also were concerned. So, if there's anything that makes sense to me about how to prevent another genocide, it is not just to develop moral intelligence, but also to stand outside yourself and stand with like-minded people who can give each other courage and talk about compassion, so that when the time comes, it is not an isolated experience that you have to go through. And instead, you will have groups of people around you can depend on for moral support. If we continue to just think that only as individuals we will just work on ourselves, the world is going to be a better place, I think we're deluding ourselves.
Thanks, Myrna. Tom or Maria?
Hi, you don't know anything, right? And when I first started this class, I thought it was just going to be another history lesson. I mean, I got a lot more out of this class than just a history lesson. Not only did I get a lot from the lectures, but I got a lot order for history not to repeat itself, we need to know our history. And what we learn in here will affect us everywhere else. And that's about it.
Thank you, Noreen.
Till the 12th.
Well, it's time for another number. Either you, Ilka, or Paul.
Ladies first.
I'm going to find them to say what others have said already. I think for all of us, a very strong impression has been that we have been very lucky that we were able to learn from people that were actually still part of the history. Because we know this is not going to be so much longer, but all of you will be able to tell your grandchildren that you have seen and spoken and been taught by survivors, that you have seen a liberator, that you have seen a hidden child, that you have seen a rescuer. And that is an amazing experience that we could have that. I'm very grateful for all the people that came and organized all of this. The most horrible thing about studying the Holocaust is that we have to realize that it's over, it happened, and we cannot bring one person back to life. So why are we studying it? You've probably in the last few months noticed that when you try to talk to other people about it, that they did not want to talk to you about it. Have you had that experience? That they say, oh, you're always thinking about these hard things. Are you guilty? To me, they say, you must be guilty. Always doing this kind of thing. Maybe you've noticed that too. People shy away from it. People don't want to deal with it. It's too frightening. Or they say, oh, it'll happen again. On the streets in San Francisco, when I talk to people, they ask me what I do. Sometimes they're shocked and they say, you know, it's going to happen again. Can't do anything about it. But we don't believe that. We believe that there's something about it. We hope that we can do something about it, at least in our immediate world. And for that, we have to understand how the Holocaust historically, psychologically could happen. And we learned, as others have said already, that the good and the evil, the infinite good and the infinite evil is in all of us as human beings. Maybe that's what in the Bible is called the original sin. Sometimes I think that the imperfection of us. And what it means to develop as a human being is to find out how to direct the good and evil in ourselves, because our passions, our fears are certainly so strong that it's very hard to have control over them. And we've learned that in the later stages, when the propaganda is in full force, when there's a strong leader, when the country is in very bad economic shape, then it is hard to quench the emotions of people, and it's easy to find scapegoats. So what we have to do, and what I think in this society, in the US and much of the Western society, we still have the opportunity to do is to modeling oneself after the Quakers in the United States was very important. Now we can model ourselves after what we have learned from the strengths, the courage of many other people that we have met, like the rescuers. But here is such an extreme situation that it may be very uncomfortable to act, but sometimes in our normal life. And we also have to do something that will make us feel a lot better. I remember the story of the little boy during the anti-nuclear era, when everybody in his class said he was afraid, he or she was afraid of a nuclear war. And one little kid said, this is a story that it illustrates, human. I'm not afraid. And the teacher said, why? And he said, because my dad goes to meetings every week to fight the nuclear war. So I think, I know it empowers us to act, to do something. So all we have to do is look around. We can work with the homeless, we can be a big brother or a big sister during the summer. Just look at something that we can give back to society and have a lot of courage. It's not so hard, it is easier. It's hard. But it's getting easier. It is hard. It's incredibly hard to stand out, to not be like, in your dorm or in your athletic group. It's incredibly hard. But that's what we have to do, I think. I'm sure I forgot a lot of things, but thank you all very, very much. I know this wasn't the easiest course to take. Thank you very much for your seriousness, for coming, for going through all the illusions. Sorry that was so long.
No, that's okay, we've got the time. Thank you. Wonderful. Let's see, I guess Tom and then Paul.
Let's see, I don't even know where to start here, but I guess the greatest thing I've learned this whole class is basically where to start. And like the gentleman sitting next to me, he used to use the term white trash, and like people, I think of my friends in the group that I hang out with, and it's just something, white trash, oh yeah, it's funny, But if you think about it, now we have the ammunition, we saw what happened, it all started with vocabulary. Hitler played on vocabulary, that's what he did. The Jews, their fault, Jews, their fault, I kept on pointing the finger. So you think about how many times you hear the term, I might be pulling this out of proportion, but white trash, and that's their fault, it's Runner Park, it's so dirty, whatever, bring it close. So maybe next time you hear that term or something, you can step up and say, well, maybe it's not their fault, maybe it's just as much your fault as everyone else's fault. It is another human being you're talking about. And anyone can correct me if I'm wrong anywhere here. But, Hitler also got a lot of his racist feelings from the United States. Like expressing blacks, things like that. They don't really step up there. I don't know, it just means sometimes when you sit at home and you got after this class, you think how depressing it was, things like that. You just roll with it, and like basketball game starts, so you just bury yourself in tea and figure out whatever you're going to do. But I think it is time for someone to do something, even if it's just on the minuscule level. Just say something to your buddies, it's time to knock off. You don't have to embarrass them in front of friends. You pull them aside and say something. Maybe it's not all their fault, maybe it's just much our fault. The Runner Park is so dirty, whatever you want to talk about. But, I don't know. On the lighter side, I just wanted to say something. I decided to conduct an interview for this class. I talked to Doogie. I went down to his trailer park down in Nevada, and I had a great time. It was neat. I never thought, I think that's the part that hit me the most out of class. And I got to actually talk to someone that was there that
peace activists in ex-Yugoslavia who are working and have been working for years to stem and to overcome ethnic strife in the Balkans, and who were not consulted and are not being consulted regarding the ceasefire and the future of Bosnia. And the message that I glean from this fact is that we need to get our diplomats to listen to a broader spectrum of authoritative voices when they're trying to set up schemes for political interaction in the world that will work, especially women's voices, because it's primarily, well, I mean, there are plenty of men, too, that have been involved in the peace activist movement in ex-Yugoslavia, but in particular, it's the women's voices that tend not to get heard. Policy is made by and large by men, or it certainly has been in the world for the last couple of millennia, and I am convinced that if we are serious about doing things differently and doing things more effectively towards promoting peace, we have to place more value on women's voices and listen to them more assiduously. Okay, so that's one thing that I've learned, and I'll just let that stand as exemplary for a whole bunch of little facts. I'm more concerned, though, with what we have not learned. The theme of this year's series was toward preventing genocide in the modern world. And I am at least as concerned now as I was at the beginning of the series that we're not doing a good job of that. We don't do typical, effective genocide prevention. Witness all the places in the world where genocides are going on. East Timor, Rwanda, Burundi, Nigeria, Malaysia, Borneo, the Amazonian rainforest where indigenous groups are being pushed out by people who want to cut the wood, cut the trees down, etc., etc. I haven't mentioned ex-Yugoslavia because that's, for the moment at least, calmed down. We have to do a better job. One Jan Karski said in his otherwise so inspirational and wonderful talk, one thing that he said that disappointed me was an answer to a student's question about what practical steps we could take, and he said, I don't really know. You know as well as I do. He had said the same thing to me over the telephone. I think, A, he's selling himself too short. He knows plenty about that question. If he would just take his own experiences and turn them into something like prescriptions, they don't have to be precise prescriptions or absolute commands, you know, act this way, that way, but you can indeed, on the basis of such experience as he has had, come up with injunctions for us all, the kinds of things that we need to do differently, the kinds of things that we need to concentrate on more carefully than we have in the past. Partial answers to that question of what must we do differently were provided by many of our speakers. All of them emphasized the necessity for education. And of course that is necessary. But again, I was a little disappointed that not more of our speakers said more about specific steps to take that they think, personally, based on their own experience and their own analysis of the problems, that they think would be valuable beyond education. Because education is the necessary condition for preventing genocide, but it's not a sufficient condition. I think we know that. We can know all kinds of information and facts. Our knowledge can be at a wonderfully high academic level. And yet, if we don't act on what we know, we're not going to prevent a thing. So it seems that that's where we really do need to learn more, and I'm continuing to look for ways to do that. Not just more knowledge, more information, but utilitarian skills. Skills of conflict resolution. Skills at nipping destructive interaction between human beings in the bud. Now, how do we go about gaining and employing such skills? A problem with university courses in general, from this perspective, is that they shy away from such essentially moral issues. Traditionally, universities are places that adopt the misguided standpoint that for faculty to promote moral action is the equivalent of them promoting their own narrow agendas, even propagandizing on the malleable and impressionable minds of their students. I don't think that's true at all. I know I'm swimming against the academic stream when I say this, and opening myself to criticism from plenty of my colleagues, and as a matter of fact, they do criticize. But I'm as convinced of this as I am of anything. We need to train ourselves more effectively, and us teachers need to train our students to act to stem prejudice and stereotyping, discrimination, scapegoating, and violence before these destructive practices escalate into genocide. So, what must we do? Let me just break that question down now into three different answers. First, the personal, then the collective, and then as regards us here at Sonoma State. The personal answers I'm going to put in the first person. You can relate to them as you will. If they strike a chord, so much the better. How am I going to act in order to play my role, play my part in keeping genocide from happening in the future? I will practice tolerance and compassion and generosity. I will follow the lead of David and Jan Karski and many others that we've heard from in this regard. I will not scapegoat. If I've got a problem, I will take responsibility for solving it myself rather than claiming that somebody else is the cause of my problems. I will shun ideologies because they are narrow, misleading, and destructive. I will question authority. And I urge all of you students to question your teacher's authority, question mine. I will recognize the interconnectedness of the Earth's social systems and its ecology, and I will act to strengthen that interconnection. I will recognize the enabling link between war and genocide, and therefore I will act to prevent war, because I want to prevent genocide. I think this is one point that perhaps didn't come out as clearly during the semester as I would like to see it, namely that while war is not a necessary precondition for genocide, it certainly is a contributing factor that makes genocide much easier. If we've already got a war going on, it's easy for the government in power or the military organization to fan people's patriotic flames and set them against their so-called enemies in genocidal ways. So act to prevent war if you want to prevent genocide. I will recognize that waste of natural resources, material resources, promotes war because wasters fight over limited resources. So I will practice frugality in practical terms. It means I won't drive so much, I might bike more, won't use so much hot water. There's all kinds of ways. Figure out your own, but do practice frugality. I will question my own assumptions and habits, and I will change any that I've learned are destructive. I will become and remain an activist for peace and justice. And in that attempt, I will talk, and I will write, and I will advocate. What do we have to do on the collective scale? I think we have to insist on changing political and economic systems, the ones that we participate in, toward the ideal of supporting decent material conditions and human rights for all of the Earth's people. This has some painful implications. As Ilka was pointing out, we in the first world use way more than our share. And we don't realize that we're doing it. When we find out that we're doing it, we tend to get defensive about it. People have low tolerance for bad news, especially when the bad news implies that they ought to change their own wasteful habits. And I'm not singling out any single one of you. I am talking about all of us. The way we lead our lives in this first world society, I think we have to change that. We need to insist that our own governments, at the national, state, and local levels, practice the precepts that I identified in my list about myself. This ties in with what Jan Karski was saying about how governments, people who get involved in governments tend to soul, or at least they don't listen to it anymore. We have to insist that our government representatives realize that the most important thing for them to do is to continue to listen to their soul, because only by doing that will they be listening to ours. We have to refuse to use war when we're attempting to resolve conflicts. Wars don't work. And we have to demand of all of our levels of government accountability to the general welfare, not simply to limited, but to the general welfare. Here at Sonoma State University, well, what do we do next? We've got this nice lecture series mounted. I don't think it's enough. We've got to get people, children at younger ages, to start thinking about these things and acting in ways that will promote a healthy future rather than a destructive one. One of the things that we're doing with the Holocaust Studies program here is working to get a grant that will, a large-scale teacher education program that will take the state-mandated Holocaust education. I mean, now it is mandated that Holocaust be taught in some way, shape, or form at the secondary level of schools in California. But as with most such unfunded mandates, that gets applied in a whole spectrum of ways ranging from the relatively effective to the terribly ineffective and maybe even counterproductive. So what we're proposing is to set up a teacher training program that will focus on the Holocaust, use it as a model for understanding lots of other kinds of destructive behavior. And in particular, if I have my way about it, we will include in this new program for teaching teachers how to teach children about the Holocaust and related problems. We will include plenty of concrete techniques for the students to practice regularly, so that they know what to do when they're faced with destructive or discrimination and destructive behavior, the other violence promoting phenomena that we're also aware of, that they will know how to respond rather than having to ask themselves every time. And I think it's necessary for people to get to practice the techniques to where they become a more automatic response. So that's just one aspect of this teacher education program that we're looking to mount that I have high hopes for. One final thing, we are initiating now a new bachelor's here at Sonoma State University called Global Studies. University level BA program in the kind of intercultural, mutual knowledge and respect and cooperation that is our guarantee and perhaps our only guarantee of a future that will be free of genocide. I invite you to participate in either this program, the Global Studies major, if you're looking for a major to sign up for, or set up your own similar programs when you get in a position to do such a thing. Take an active, that's my challenge to you, take an active role in preventing genocide. Well, I think that what I'd like to do now is open the floor up to general discussion, and if you have something to say to any of the particular panelists here, please say who it is that you're addressing. Yeah, here, you want to start?
Yeah, I have a general comment and to speak of and something that I've written. In response to the question of what I've learned, one of them is humanity occurs only between individuals, not between groups, not between blacks and whites or Jews and Gentiles or Greeks and Turks or men and women. It occurs only between individuals. An example of my own self is that I was at the library the other day. I was speaking with a woman of color who was a teacher, and we were lamenting the troubles and woes of teaching, and she said it would be difficult for her to get a job, and I looked at her and, how can it be difficult for you to get a job? You're a single woman, you're a single mother, you're a woman of color, you know, what's the big deal? And she turned on me and said, I'm not that. My name is Teresa. And I found that to be most illuminating for my own self, that here I am espousing my own views, yet in faced with a one-to-one situation. I said to this person, you are all these generalities, and in fact, her name was Teresa. The other thing that I'd like to say is that when we speak about courage, I'm not sure who the quote was from, but the quote is that, you know, courage is the ladder upon which all other virtues stand on. And of course, we can't have courage unless there is fear. If you don't have fear, you cannot demonstrate courage. And the last thing I want to read is a partial, I guess, an answer to the question that has been put forth by the panel, or by the topic of the discussion. Quote, one may no more live in the world without picking up the moral prejudices of the world than one will be able to go to hell without sweating. These words uttered by H.L. Mencken appear to resonate louder and more intently today than at times past. We breathe intolerance in through our noses and spew prejudice and hate out our mouths. Intolerance becomes as second nature as breathing itself. Words are the guides to actions, and the mouth makes the first move. Language counts, and words must be recognized for the deeds they are. Tolerance and human rights do not come to us naturally. As we do not become intolerant, prejudiced, or indifferent overnight, why should we presume we can reverse this extensive and protracted process simply with a field trip, assembly program, a 2-day workshop, or as an adjunct chapter in one course or another? For tolerance and human rights to become habitual, a rigorous, in-depth, challenging course of inquiry, investigation, reflection, and expression must occur. Only through the immersion in a directed and thematic course of study over a drawn span of time can we hope for the diffusion of tolerance to occur and become as second nature as the built-up waste material of diffusion intolerance. Thinking causes one to begin to ask questions, to develop a sense of curiosity and inquiry to the world around them. If this learning process of inquiry is working, it will generate a sense of dissonance and discord within the student. The student will begin to wrestle with oneself and consequently the world. The student will feel to restore some semblance of harmony within themselves. It is precisely through these clashes and struggles in the realms of imagination, ideas, musings, reflections, dreams, and aspirations that thinking occurs. Through this internal wrestling match, we lead our young people to a sense of comprehension regarding their own fragile humanity, thus enabling them to project this dimension of humaneness out into the world as a counterbalance to fear, hatred, intolerance, and indifference. While celebrating our individuality and diversity, we must simultaneously emphasize the human commonalities and those universal experiences found in all cultures and among all peoples of the planet, the fundamental characteristics that bind us together in the family of humankind. Thinking is the genesis and the progenitor that gives form and substance to our ideas, which in turn have the power and the capacity to influence, alter, and ultimately transform not only our worldview, but the world itself. When a new dimension is applied to one's worldview and the door is opened, it can never again be closed or denied. It is through the arts that students discover various modalities and mediums to express and communicate that which has been learned and stirred in their minds and hearts. The arts stimulate us to our imaginations and allow us to take off. Every child, every student should be given access to the arts, language arts, visual arts, and not for the purpose of becoming a painter or musician or great writer, but for becoming a more humane human being. Yet, before any of our senses are to be kindled awake and stirred, the mind, via the imagination, must be fired. The teacher is the spark that fires a student's imagination. Children are apt to esteem that which they see their parents and teachers hold dear. When parents and teachers are willing to sacrifice for the principles they espouse, the children see this as genuine and are likely to accept these values in their own lives. It is my belief that what needs to be taught already exists. Except they exist in courses from Amnesty International. They exist in the courses from Facing History and Ourselves. They exist in courses of tolerance from the Southern Poverty Law Center. To sit up and say that you want to recreate and reinvent the wheel for teacher training, it's already out there. You just need to get some vehicle to be able to get the curriculums into the classrooms. It's not that they're not here. Conscience through literature, Amnesty International. Facing History and Ourselves, Citizenship in America. I mean, these curriculum exist in depth. And I would
They exist in depth, but they're not incorporated yet in the established system. That's the point here.
Right, the example is to like get them in the classroom, and You know, it's difficult to have a teacher or anybody teach this and then not behave in that fashion. Students, if you talk to them about being moral and ethical, and they observe that it's just, oh, I'll put my ethical, moral hat on, and they see someone act as if this is not their way of life, it becomes so democracy. So, you know, those are my
True.
challenges.
That's why we have to teach. That's why we have to teach teachers to be activists too.
Those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Yeah.
In the years that I've been coming to the series, and I believe I came probably the first year, and I've been coming weekly, but I don't come every year, and I don't come to every lecture. But I'm really...
Can you all hear okay? Speak nice enough.
I'm really pleased to hear this year that there's more discussion of the soul. There's more discussion of sense of community. Perhaps the suggestion would be to do next year a series Prevention 2. And it gets more into really looking at, whenever we talk about racism or hatred, I'd like to see to go under. Let's talk about fear. Let's talk about pain and suffering. So many of the lecturers, they will touch on it, and we'll touch on it throughout the various lectures. But if you're going to talk about conflict resolution, which I think is very important, that I'd like to see next year much more of a focus on getting really underneath to what it is to be human. Not just where racism comes from, but from what Myrna was saying, to really talk about, and what you were saying, to really get into some basic underpinnings of what it is to be human in the world, and come more from a spiritual perspective, and not just psychological. Psychological, we tend to have dualities, and right, wrong, good, bad, and we can get all caught in. I would like to see us go even deeper from that, and really come from what it is to be human. And in response to your first statement about you don't really know what to do, it's to not just wake up in the morning and say, I'm not going to be racist, but it's to say, well, what's my hatred about? Where's my fear coming from? Where's my pain and suffering coming from? To be able to really get underneath that in a lot of what you said that you would also like to do. I mean, it's wonderful if you do all those things. And maybe you'll walk on water next, because what you've asked yourself to do is a lot more complex.
Well, I face my fear as a Jew, listening to the news where 1,200 Jews are being marked. I mean, I react to that. I feel that very, very deeply.
1,200 Jews are being marked?
Or singled out in
Singled out.
exchange for the peace process.
Oh.
I'm interested in peace and with other people within my congregation who work for peace, their daily lives on the line for peace, and I stand with them. And I wonder, okay, what's going to happen to me? That's a form of fear.
Maybe you can use that as an opportunity for some courage, like Gershon was saying.
There's more to it than that.
Oh, more to it than that.
But that's why, that's why I would really like to see, I think what can really help the students now and the faculty is to begin to feel it, do more as what's known as process, more really experiential.
Yeah, but this is a lecture series.
Even though it's a lecture series, even though the tenure, the nature, the substance of the lecture series can open itself up a bit more.
I like the impulse. I'm not sure how I myself would go about trying to make that work for all my students, but I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it's not so much an impulse as it is, it's just a different perspective, and to begin to sit with that and see, yes, right, to see how that can be woven in much more.
Habib?
I'd like you, if I could, to respond to the suggestion it seems to me, at least from I've been able or unable to deal with the things that become clear to me in this course, that getting underneath things in a more experiential way is something that is not, I think, so much within the realm of the lecturers or the organizers, so much as it's something that we need to do on an individual level because it's so intimate and so personal to each of us. I have found that I don't really know, in spite of the wonderful lectures and the huge amount of information, as much as I can say that I have generally learned about the nature or history of genocide, I don't know what makes it work or not work in me. And I don't imagine that if I can't figure that out, that anyone, no matter how gifted or informed a lecturer, could do it for me. It seems that the experiential class, if you will, already is in that as soon as we walk out the door, we have lives to lead that will inevitably bring up every single thing that we've talked about here. I doubt the power of any lecturer to make that happen for me if I'm not already willing and concentrating my energies on making it happen myself.
Respond?
Sure.
I really appreciate what you're saying. I really appreciate what you're saying. And it is very intimate. And there is an experience in life that you have the intimate, and once you become more and more aware, it's not figuring it out. It's not a lecture giving you an answer or figuring it out. It is an academic environment that taps into a compassionate awareness. Not just compassion, but a compassionate awareness within yourself. That here in the actual classroom setting, some of that, some seeds can be planted. That's really all it is. You will absolutely do the work yourself. You got it. And it's your own journey. But that the seeds are planted here, or can be planted here, and that there can be more dialogue that goes on a more personal level. And for us to learn that we don't have to be so threatened. I mean, if we're about getting out there and standing up and speaking up, you know, and being someone who says, excuse me, I don't agree with that. We're all talking about courage. Let's model it here and do it here and speak up here and begin to be in an environment in which we have a fairly, quote, safe environment. Begin to deal with some of that stuff. And then you can take that out into the world. So it's really just taking it piece by piece, really step by step, but with this, the wholeness to me of academic is not just the intellect or the feelings, but it's
George, and then
I kind of agree with a lot of what people have been saying, but I'd like to see this more inclusive. I'm looking around, it doesn't feel inclusive. I'd like to put more of the outside world in here. The academics are great. They've been real stimulating for me, and I appreciate it. It's given me, like Paul said, information to back my feelings. But it would be nice to have a truer dialogue instead of a select part of this community. And I look around and I feel alone. And I kind of know why. I know that things that are internalized in me are different in each of us. And things that I'm sensitive to, other people aren't. And I also feel an overwhelming amount of likeness in this room. And I don't like it. It makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Jerry said an overwhelming amount of whiteness.
well, the cost was not going to.
No, of course it's
I'm
not.
putting reasons out there, and I'm just putting it out, putting my feeling out. And that you can't deny.
And I wonder, just a second, Gershon, I wonder if maybe a panel member might want to comment on that. I mean, I've often wondered why we have people of color taking this course. After all, you know, one of the main bases of the Holocaust was racism. So why don't we get a better racial mix among the students here? Maria?
I
series would be valuable for your fellow students. Tell them about it, talk it up, especially those of them who aren't quiet. I do feel, along with George, in spite of the fact that, sure, okay, there are some minority people here. Cool, I'm really glad you're here, but I'd like to see more. Yeah, Prashant?
Some concrete examples. My guess would be that nobody here knows, the majority of people here do not know a homeless individual by their first name. And that maybe, in fact, we kind of see them here or see them there. Just to go up and introduce yourself, throw a few pennies into their coffer, and to learn their name. To say, oh, hi, Mike, makes a very big impact. Because once you know their name, they're no longer homeless. They're Mike, George, or Anna, whatever. Another suggestion would be to introduce yourself to an elderly person or someone who is different from you. Just one person, reach out to one person. And it's tough. It's awkward, it's tough. But, I'm sure here on campus there are students who are physically challenged, who are, like some assistance, but don't diminish me at the same time. It's kind of all around you every day. You don't have to get on to San Francisco or over to Bosnia to deal with injustices or your own sense of humanity.
I've been coming to the lectures for a few years too, not to everyone. And one of the things, what you mentioned, the lack of concrete manners, ways that we can approach this very personal problem, has distressed me too. But I keep trying to think of how can we, what could I come up with in terms of if I was a person in the panel, what could I come up with a positive suggestion that would mean something? And in a way, I kind of think we're singing to the chorus, because one of the things that has upset me quite a bit is I see the increase in violence in society, particularly among young people, and I see it largely starting with verbal violence. And I personally have seen so much of an increase since out of bounds behavior became okay. It's kind of like the final blow of the 60s, which is, of course, when I grew up. And things like Beavis and Butthead, where kids watch this. I'm a teacher, retired at this point, and kids that are 5 and 6 years old are coming and talking to Beavis and Butthead, and their parents are letting them watch us laugh. Well, this is out of bounds behavior that kids are learning from other people, and they're taking it to their peers, and then teachers are trying to counteract this, but the family has a lot more influence than schools in most instances. And there are teaching situations like Teaching Tolerance is Teaching Tolerance magazine through the Southern Poverty Law System and so forth that are trying very hard. They're making it, sending out to whoever wants it, so that they can, and they have marvelous ideas in that magazine to help teachers to teach tolerance in a living way, like you're talking about, to reach them from within. But I think in a way that it's not people who are sitting in this room that are, they're dealing with how can we deal with this. And I'm thinking about the people that are causing bounds behavior are people who are not going to come to a class like this. They are not going to watch show on TV. They are not going to expose themselves to anything that will change their behavior that's out of bounds or unacceptable and building
exist, and there are models, participant groups that don't traditionally get along very well. You know, it's not just one group or another.
I just wanted to respond to what you had to say, that, you know, as educated people here and as wannabe educated people here, it's our task to infiltrate into society and to be opinion leaders. And I think that's what's okay. We're preaching to the choir here, and you know, maybe the rest of the population is too busy glued to their television sets to come to a lecture series like this. But you know, we can increase awareness by increasing the numbers of us who are aware and out there in positions of leadership.
Anybody want to wrap it up?
Phil, if I may,
Okay.
I would like to...
Wait a second, just a second.
Oh.
We have one more. There's a hand up here. Yeah. Can you speak a little louder, please? I can't hear you.
What he had said about there's no substitution for a personal situation. For instance, I wanted to go to Dr. Steiner's office and speak to him personally. I think we forget that there's two survivors on the panel, Dr. Steiner and Dr. Banco. I myself, as much as I wanted to go and visit him, I did not do that. And that is going back to looking within. Why didn't I take the time to do that? Why didn't any of us, I don't know how many people did, visit Dr. Steiner and Dr. Banco, but I think that's something that we need to look at about ourselves.
Thank you. And if you haven't done it yet, I'm sure Dr. Steiner would love to have you come now, after this lecture. Gene?
I would like to address my remarks.
Just a second.
Oh,
John, say something.
I will continue here towards the end of the semester, and I'll be here, I'm sure, every Tuesday and probably also every Thursday. Probably every Thursday, because Tuesday we won't have any meetings anymore, but it's classes. So anyone who wants to see me, I'm more than welcome. I already have some people who want to see me on Thursday. Thursday probably will be the best day. So I'll be there as of 2:30, 3 o'clock on until just about when I have to pick up my son, which will be around 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock.
And Paul, being an emeritus faculty member, doesn't have regular office hours on campus, I don't think, but maybe you could indicate to the students how they could get in touch with you, Paul.
I'm in a difficult position that I will be out of town as of the 20th. I have another final at the junior college. So if you'd like to see me, I will be here this Thursday, this coming Thursday. And if you want to make another arrangement, my phone number is in the phone book. So you call me at home and we can see what arrangements we can make. But I will be coming Thursday from, we have a meeting that's scheduled, right?
Well, that's right.
Yeah, and 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
So I will be, and we have a section meeting from 4 to 5, and there's somebody who's coming to see me at 5, but I will be here from then on. So I can come Thursday as of right now at noon. So if anybody wants to sign up from noon on, between noon and 2 you can sign up, and after 5 you can sign up. Okay? And if you want other times, just give me a phone call. I have my right name in the phone book. It's always been there.
Okay, Gene, we're over time here, so make
very
it brief.
briefly, I'd like to talk to the future parents of America who are here. Of America. In 1945, 3,000 Jews and their progeny now owe their life to one German woman, the mother of Herman Gravy. Ever since he was old enough to understand, she trained him to think and consider and do what is right, Herman. He would come home with a problem from school of some sort. He had to solve it, do what is right. And when that came, face down the entire Nazi, or a good chunk of the Nazi establishment, and saved 3,000 Jews. The book is called The Moses of Robno by Reverend Haneke. So, you can do it. You future parents. Thanks.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your courageous participation throughout the series, and especially the community members who will not be attending the class on Thursday and then the final session next Thursday. Thank you especially for coming as often as you have. And students, we'll see you on Thursday.